Hey, friends. Christian faith and the natural sciences. Uh, Given that we're not meeting on Thursday and that we didn't get to the stuff about humans created in God's image in Tuesday's reading, that starts on page 198 in Moritz. Um, Before that, in the reading, up to that point, he's discussed the ways in which the often popular notions about what makes human beings unique in comparison to other animals. He shows that in a lot of contemporary science research and so on, that kind of uniqueness is being brought into question, and legitimately so, I think. You can read all that stuff, and I think it's very good. I would just say that from the biblical standpoint, I think it's also the case that very often human beings, Christian or otherwise, have gone to great pains to distinguish ourselves from other animals. And, there are differences. It's obvious. The fact that I'm recording this lecture to you all through technology, you know, invented, discovered by human beings, invented. We don't have to worry that our difference and uniqueness, at least in degree, from other animals, that's not going to be challenged. But just remember that even from the biblical perspective, as we said in class, in Genesis 1, Adam, created in God's image, male and female, occurs on the sixth day. Adam does not get their own special day. They share creation, or they're being created with the other land animals, or the animals of the Eretz, cows and horses and such, coyotes. We are all on the sixth day. Now, keep in mind, I don't read that in a literal way, as though on the sixth 24-hour day, or sixth any kind of period, that human beings were created along with land animals. I don't think it's a scientific statement. I do think it's a statement about creation, though, and kind of a statement about humans. Again, now Genesis 1 does say that we are created in God's image, but that doesn't seem to merit our own special day. And that seems not worthy of note. Likewise, in Genesis 2, where we're not told that human beings are created in God's image, that language is not used. The closest thing to it would be the fact that the Lord, Tetragrammaton, the holy name of God, that finds that there's something that's not good in creation. It's not good for Adam to be alone, as you remember. And so we read, and so the Lord proceeds to scoop out of the earth and shape other creatures. You see, this would not, we probably shouldn't read this literally. Are we creatures of dust? Yes. In a metaphorical sense, but certainly we come forth from the earth, and that's true, and we will return to the earth. So it's certainly true that we're dust. So are other creatures. And the more important point is that even while the Lord brings these creatures to the human to see what the human will name them, which in itself is an interesting statement, and whatever Adam named the creatures, that was their name. So that distinguishes Adam from these other creatures, for sure. But remember that when God breathed into the human the breath of life, and I've just learned that it's actually in the plural, the breath of lives, breathed into the human the breath of lives, the human became a nephesh. And nephesh simply means a living thing, that which is alive. And it's not insignificant that the same word is used for these other creatures. We've mentioned this in class, that God, sort of brings to the human, like, how would this be as a partner for you? And the human names them. They don't respond, though. There isn't a corresponding reply, and that's what the human needs. But they're nonetheless called nepheshim, the plural of nephesh. So the same term is used. Sometimes this term is translated as soul, which I suppose is fine. It's one English term, but the problem is, of course, that very often the term soul comes loaded with a lot of extra metaphysical baggage, mostly from the Greek philosophical tradition. So that if we read nephesh as soul, we have to also be willing to recognize that it isn't just human beings. And it wouldn't even be human beings having souls, but human beings being souls. And my doggie that's snoring in the background, Coco, oh, you can even see her back there, sweet girl that she is. She's a nephesh. So if we were to insist on the term soul here, we would simply have to include other living and breathing creatures. She's breathing hard enough that you may not hear her, but she's getting into her sleep pretty well. Yeah, so what I'm saying is that in the first two creation stories, distinct as they are, they each have their ways both of sort of distinguishing humans in a unique role, but also of understanding the human in company with and even in kinship with these other non-human creatures. So that's pretty important. Be that as it may, Moritz begins on page 198 to talk about this material about human beings, and his heading is humans as the unique image and likeness of God. And very early in there, he says that in the Bible, there is one designation the human species is given that non-human creatures are not given. And I do think it's important to honor that. There are theologians, and Moritz actually mentions a little bit, theologians that are pushing that why do we limit the notion of image of God to humans? And I think the right answer is because Genesis does. If we're going to use that language, and we get it from Genesis, we ought to honor the mode of its usage and not get overly creative with its applications, I think. So Genesis 1:26 says humans, unlike other beings, are created, and then I quote, as the image and likeness of God. And then he puts in parentheses, or imago Dei. Some of you have probably heard that, or imago Dei. I learned it as imago Dei in college. The fact of the matter is, it's just a little Latin phrase that means nothing more than image of God. And I know that some people get captivated or fascinated by the fact that they know that Latin, so they like to use it. But for goodness sakes, all it means is image of God. Let's just stick with the English here. Imago Dei doesn't add anything and doesn't even sound all that learned, at least in my judgment. Now, he does have a footnote 98 there. Here I follow Gerhard von Rod's translation, speaking of humans as the image of God rather than in the image of God. Gerhard von Rad was a great Hebrew scholar and wrote amazing commentaries on Genesis, so I'm not going to try to differ with Gerhard von Rad. I'm also not quite sure what the difference is between human beings in the image of God and human beings as the image of God. I actually like as the image of God myself, and maybe for reasons that'll come out. More to the point is that while Moritz says this in his first paragraph on page 198, I have issues with Moritz because he immediately, he totally forgets that he said that. And the rest of the time, I'm pretty sure he just uses language of in the image of God. Indeed, he does much worse than that. and this is probably about as far as I'll get on this first lecture with this point. At the very next section starts at the top of 199, and here's his heading: the image of God in humans. Notice, the image of God in humans as a physical resemblance or shared attributes. So here's a critical point that I really want you to hear. Moritz has fallen into a very typical trap. You know, what we read in Genesis is that Adam, as male and female, is created in God's image, maybe as God's image, but we'll stick with the traditional, in God's image. But never does the Bible say that the image of God is in humans, but rather that humans are created in God's image. Once you make this switch that Moritz makes, not only in his heading, but then proceeds to do quite a bit in his text, where it's the image of God in humans, we've inverted the language, and we've also then, we're making the assumption, traditional though it may be, that the image of God is something or some ability or some, the old word we used to would be faculty, some capacity that's in us, that's inherent in us, that is like, that's the image of God in us. Again, the problem with that is the Bible, as rarely as it uses this language to begin with, never states that the image of God is in us, but rather that humans are created in God's image. So again, if it sounds like I'm quibbling, the importance of this is, once we use language of image of God in the human, then we're casting about trying to figure out, well, what is it exactly that is the image of God in humans? And of course, he'll talk about some of those leading candidates. Probably the most popular through the history of Christian thought has been reason. That human reason is like the image of God in humans. Please note that what I'm protesting is that very language to begin with. I think reason is great. I'm employing it to talk to you, and you're employing it to listen to me. But actually, there's nothing in the Bible whatsoever to like sort of identify reason with the image of God. And again, the real problem is that kind of attempt usually flows from misusing the biblical language to begin with, from humans created in God's image to, hey, what's the image of God in humans? I hope you see that point. I've probably made it too much. I'm going to stop this first video right here.